I, Alpha King David of the Blood Moon Syndicate, reject you, Lisa, as my fated mate and Luna. The words tore through the dead silence of the grand hall, echoing off the ancient stone walls like a judge's gavel. Lisa stood barefoot on the marble, the ceremonial white silk of her dress suddenly feeling like a heavy, suffocating shroud. 700 pairs of eyes watched her, some glinting with pity, most clouded with cold indifference. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. "You are weak," David added, his voice a low, gravelly sneer. A king cannot rule with a fragile, human-blooded anomaly at his side. By sunrise, you are rogue. Lisa lifted her chin, meeting his icy blue stare. "I accept your rejection, Your Majesty. But remember this night. The next time we meet, you will be the one looking up." 7 years later, the rain over the metropolis of New Arcadia lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Aurelian Tower. From the 85th floor, the city looked like a circuit board of bleeding neon and headlights. Ignorant to the primal forces that truly governed it, Lisa stood by the glass, holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. She didn't drink. She merely let the cold glass press against her palm, grounding her. The reflection staring back at her was a stranger to the barefoot girl who had been cast out of the Blood Moon territory into the freezing woods. The woman in the glass wore a meticulously tailored charcoal suit, her posture forged from steel, her eyes carrying the sharp, unforgiving edge of a predator who had clawed her way to the apex. "Oh, Your Majesty," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Lisa didn't turn. "Report, Marcus." Marcus, a hulking lichen with a jagged scar bisecting his left eyebrow, stepped into the dimly lit office. He dropped a thick, leather-bound dossier onto the mahogany desk. "The Northern Territories are collapsing faster than our analysts projected. The silver blight in their soil has decimated their crop yields, and rogue factions are tearing at their borders. The Syndicate is bleeding out." "And their alpha?" Lisa asked, her voice an eerily calm hum that vibrated with a suppressed frequency. "King David is cornered. His alpha authority is fraying. His chosen Luna, Elena, hasn't produced an heir, and the pack elders are demanding he seek outside intervention to avoid total ruin." Marcus paused, the heavy silence of the room stretching between them. "He has formally requested an audience with the Aurelian Queen. He's asking for a bailout, a military and financial alliance." Lisa slowly turned away from the window. The ambient light caught the faint, silver scar on her left wrist, the only physical remnant of a severed mating bond. When a wolf is rejected by their fated mate, they usually succumb to madness or a broken heart within a year. Lisa had spent her first year screaming in agony in the lawless Badlands. She spent the next 6 conquering them. Through sheer, unadulterated willpower and a dormant, ancient bloodline triggered by her near-death experience, she hadn't just survived. She had united the fragmented rogue packs, the exiled lichens, and the shadow syndicates into the Aurelian Empire. To the world, she was an enigmatic, faceless monarch. To her people, she was a god. Did he specify conditions? Lisa walked toward the desk, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. He offered territorial concessions, a 20% stake in their lumber and mining sectors. Marcus scoffed. Desperate scraps. Lisa traced the gold-leafed emblem on the dossier. A ghost of a smile, sharp and utterly devoid of warmth, touched her lips. "He is drowning, Marcus, and he wants me to throw him a rope. Do we deny the request? Let the Blood Moon starve?" No," Lisa murmured, opening the file to a photograph of David. He looked older. The arrogant, icy boy king was gone, replaced by a hardened man with heavy bags under his eyes and a tense defensive set to his jaw. "We grant the audience. Neutral ground?" The Obsidian Citadel in 3 days. Marcus bowed his head slightly. I will inform his beta. Shall I prepare the standard treaty terms? There will be no treaty, Marcus, Lisa said, snapping the dossier shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. There will only be a surrender. I want my wardrobe prepared. Something imposing. If King David wishes to beg the Queen, he will do so properly. As Marcus exited, leaving her alone in the sprawling office, Lisa looked down at her wrist again. The phantom ache of the rejection, a ghost that had haunted her for over 2,000 nights, flared briefly before freezing over. The weak girl was dead. The Queen had arrived. The war room of the Blood Moon pack house smelled of stale coffee, old blood, and despair. David leaned his weight against the heavy oak table, his knuckles white as he stared down at the sprawling tactical map. Red pins, indicating rogue breaches, clustered aggressively along their northern borders. Blue pins, representing their dwindling defensive units, looked pitifully sparse. We lost 3 more patrols in the Weeping Woods last night, Thomas, his beta, said quietly. Thomas looked exhausted, his usually sharp features dulled by weeks of sleepless nights. The rogues are organized, David. They aren't mindless scavengers anymore. They have military-grade weaponry and tactical formations. David ran a hand through his dark hair, gripping the roots until his scalp stung. And the financial sector? Thomas hesitated. The accounts are draining. Without the silver exports, we can't afford to pay the mercenaries holding the eastern ridge. If the ridge falls, the pack town is fully exposed. Damn it! David struck the table. The thick wood groaned under the force of his alpha strength, splintering slightly. Silence fell over the room. His council members, a group of graying, anxious wolves, exchanged nervous glances. There is no other way, my king. Elder Vance spoke up from the corner, his voice raspy. The Aurelian Queen has agreed to the summit. It is our only lifeline. Her empire controls 80% of the continent's wealth and military power. If she backs us, the rogues will scatter. David closed his eyes. The thought of bowing his head to a nameless, faceless sovereign, a woman who had ruthlessly subjugated the Badlands in mere years, made his wolf thrash in furious indignity. He was an Alpha King by bloodline, descending from the first shifters. He didn't beg. Yet, as he opened his eyes and looked at the tired, hollow faces of his most loyal men, the bitter taste of reality coated his tongue. He had made a vow to protect his pack. 7 years ago, he had made the hardest, most agonizing choice of his life for that very vow. His mind betrayed him, flashing back to a pair of tear-filled, defiant hazel eyes. Lisa, he forced the memory down, locking it away in the dark, iron-clad vault in his mind. He had rejected her because she was human-blooded, weak, unable to survive the brutal politics and physical demands of leading a warring pack. He had done it to secure a strong alliance through Elena, a pure-blood alpha female. But the moon goddess had a cruel sense of humor. Elena had proven to be a political disaster, incapable of bearing children and despised by the pack for her arrogance. The alliance had crumbled, and the curse of a broken mating bond had slowly poisoned the land. You will be the one looking up. Lisa's parting words still echoed in his nightmares. He had sent trackers out a year after her banishment, driven by a gnawing, inexplicable guilt. They found nothing, just a bloody scrap of her dress near a cliff edge. He had lived with the assumption she was dead. David? Thomas prompted gently. David exhaled a long, measured breath, pushing himself away from the table. Send the confirmation. We leave for the Obsidian Citadel tomorrow. Pack light. We go as diplomats, not warriors. And if she demands the knee? Elder Vance asked carefully. David's jaw tightened. If she can save our people, I will give her whatever she wants. My pride is not worth the lives of our children. He walked out of the war room, the heavy mantle of leadership pressing down on his shoulders like a physical weight. As he walked the grand hallways of his ancestral home, the shadows seemed to mock him, whispering of a past where he had chosen power over fate, only to lose both. The obsidian citadel was a brutalist masterpiece of black stone and tinted glass, perched on a jagged cliffside overlooking a churning slate-gray ocean. It was neutral territory, but every inch of it screamed of Aurelian dominance. David stood in the center of the cavernous reception hall, flanked by Thomas and 2 elite guards. The sheer scale of the room was designed to make visitors feel small, insignificant. Banners of deep crimson and gold hung from the vaulted ceilings, displaying the Aurelian crest, a wolf skull pierced by a crown. They're making us wait to establish dominance, Thomas muttered, adjusting the collar of his suit. Classic power play. Keep your heart rate steady, David ordered in a low murmur. Do not show weakness. They can smell fear. In truth, David's own wolf was pacing frantically in his mind. Something was wrong. The air in the citadel felt charged, heavy with an atmospheric pressure that made his chest tight. It was an aura of power so immense, so ancient, that his instincts were screaming at him to bare his neck. Suddenly, the massive double doors at the end of the hall began to open with a deep, grinding groan. 6 Aurelian guards stepped through first. They weren't just wolves. They were lichens. Massive, imposing, clad in tactical black gear, their eyes glowing with unnatural, disciplined ferocity. They lined the pathway, coming to a sharp, synchronized halt. Then, the scent hit him. It was a violent collision to David's senses. Underneath the cold ozone and the sharp metallic tang of winter roses, there was a ghost of something so fundamentally familiar. It felt like a physical blow to his sternum. Sweet vanilla. But it was buried, weaponized, twisted into something dark and intoxicating. His wolf slammed against the cage of his ribs. Mate. Impossible, David thought, his vision blurring for a fraction of a second. She's dead. It's a trick of the mind. Footsteps echoed against the marble. Slow, deliberate. The sharp click of heels. A woman stepped out from the shadows of the archway. She wore a tailored suit the color of a bruised sky, a flowing black trench coat draped over her shoulders like a modern cape. Her dark hair was slicked back, highlighting the sharp, aristocratic lines of her cheekbones and the lethal, unblinking focus of her hazel eyes. Thomas gasped audibly, taking a half-step back. Goddess above, David couldn't breathe. The air had been sucked from the room. His heart hammered a frantic, deafening rhythm against his ribs. The world tilted on its axis, every law of logic and reality shattering into microscopic pieces. It was Lisa, but it wasn't the fragile, barefoot girl he had humiliated in front of his pack. This woman radiated a suffocating, crushing alpha aura that forced David's elite guards to immediately drop to one knee, groaning as the invisible pressure pushed them down. Even Thomas was struggling, his knees buckling, sweat beading on his forehead. Only David remained standing, though every muscle in his body was screaming in agony, fighting the primal urge to submit to the apex predator before him. Lisa walked down the steps, her gaze locked onto David's. There was no love in her eyes, no warmth, no lingering sorrow. There was only the cold, infinite void of a queen looking at a peasant. She stopped 10 feet away from him. The silence was absolute, save for the roaring in David's ears. Alpha King David, Lisa said. Her voice was smooth, cultured, yet it carried a resonant undertone that made the glass in the windows tremble. "You have traveled a long way to ask for my mercy." David opened his mouth, but his vocal cords were paralyzed. The realization crashed over him, a tidal wave of horror, awe, and an inescapable, crushing dread. He hadn't just broken his mate. He had forged his own conqueror. "Lisa," he choked out, the name tearing his throat. Lisa tilted her head, a terrifying, beautiful smirk playing on her lips. "That name belongs to a dead girl," she replied softly. "You will address me as Your Grace." The heavy silence in the reception hall stretched until it felt like a physical weight threatening to snap David's spine. Thomas, still struggling against the suffocating pressure of Lisa's aura, shot David a desperate, pleading look. The elite guards remained frozen on one knee, heads bowed, unable to meet the gaze of the Aurelian queen. David forced air into his lungs. The scent of her, that twisted, dark vanilla, was pulling at the frayed edges of a bond he thought he had severed forever. His wolf, normally a dominant force of unyielding pride, was whining softly in the recesses of his mind, caught between an instinctive desire to submit and the ingrained arrogance of an alpha king. "Your Grace," David managed, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He did not bow. He could not completely abandon his station, not with his men watching. Lisa's smirk deepened into something colder. She didn't demand he kneel. Not yet. Her silence was a far more effective weapon. She turned gracefully, the movement fluid and predatory, her long coat sweeping behind her. "Follow me," she commanded, not bothering to look back to see if he obeyed. It was an absolute certainty that he would. David signaled his men to rise. Thomas staggered slightly, his face pale. "David," Thomas whispered, his voice trembling. "Is that really?" "Keep your mouth shut, Beta," David hissed, though his own hands were shaking as he smoothed his jacket. They followed Lisa through a maze of stark, brutalist corridors. There was no opulent decor here, no ostentatious displays of wealth like back in the Blood Moon packhouse. The obsidian citadel was designed for function, intimidation, and defense. Every guard they passed, hulking figures with dead eyes, bowed deeply as Lisa walked by. She led them into a vast, circular chamber with a massive obsidian table in the center. The room offered a dizzying view of the churning ocean far below, through reinforced glass walls. Lisa took a seat at the head of the table. She didn't invite them to sit. "You requested an audience to discuss a bailout," Lisa began, her voice devoid of the tremor it had possessed 7 years ago. She rested her elbows on the table, steepling her fingers. "You brought me a proposal. 20% of your mining and lumber yields in exchange for Aurelian military intervention and a vast sum of capital." "Yes," David said, stepping forward. He tried to project the commanding presence that usually cowed his rivals. But in this room, against her, it felt like a child playing dress-up. The rogue factions in the north are destabilizing the entire region. It's in the Aurelian Empire's best interest to contain them before they bleed into your territories. "My territories," Lisa repeated softly, a dangerous glint in her hazel eyes. "My territories are fortified with silver-laced perimeters and guarded by Lycan battalions. The rogues are a nuisance to you, Alpha David. To me, they are target practice." She picked up a sleek, black tablet from the table and tossed it carelessly toward him. It slid across the smooth obsidian surface, stopping inches from his hand. "Your financial projections are a fairy tale," she continued. "Your mines are yielding 30% less silver than you claim, and your lumber exports are stalling due to infrastructure decay. Your pack is essentially bankrupt, and your military is exhausted. You offer me 20% of a dying carcass, David flinched, the harsh truth stinging worse than a physical blow. We are experiencing a temporary setback. With your capital, we can rebuild. I am not a charity, King David. Lisa leaned back in her chair. I am an emperor. I do not make investments based on nostalgia or pity. I require a return that matches my risk. Then what are your terms? David demanded, his frustration momentarily overriding his awe. He hated feeling small. He hated that she held the leash. Complete surrender, Lisa said, her tone conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. Thomas gasped. David slammed his hands onto the table. I will not hand over my pack. You misunderstand, Lisa said coldly. I don't want your pack. They are weak, disorganized, and loyal to a failing crown. I want the territory. I want full control of the northern trade routes. Your pack will be absorbed as a vassal state to the Aurelian Empire. You will step down as Alpha King. Never. David's voice was a low, dangerous growl. His eyes flashed gold, the wolf rising to the surface, provoked by the direct challenge to his sovereignty. Lisa didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, observing his anger with clinical detachment. Never is a long time for a pack that cannot afford to feed its pups next winter. She stood up slowly. You came here because you have no other options. Elena cannot save you. Your council cannot save you. You threw me to the wolves, David, assuming I would die. But I learned how to lead them instead. She walked around the table, stopping just inches from him. The proximity was intoxicating, dangerous. He could see the faint pulse at the base of her throat, the only sign she was still physically alive and not some phantom of his past mistakes. You have 24 hours to consider my terms, Lisa said softly, her breath ghosting across his jaw. Refuse, and I will let the rogues tear the Blood Moon pack apart. I will sweep in and claim the ashes. The choice is yours. The guest quarters assigned to the Blood Moon delegation were luxurious, yet starkly devoid of warmth. Cold slate floors, minimalist furniture, and heavily tinted windows that obscured the daylight. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a high-end holding cell. David paced the length of the sitting room, his boots striking a sharp, irregular rhythm against the stone. Thomas sat on a low sofa, a half-empty glass of scotch resting on his knee. The silence in the room was suffocating, thick with unspoken accusations and terrifying realizations. She's going to bleed us dry, Thomas muttered, staring into his glass as if the amber liquid held answers. A vassal state. It's unheard of. We'd be slaves. We wouldn't be slaves, David snapped, stopping his pacing to glare at his beta. We'd be subjects. There's a difference. Tell that to the elders when you try to sell them this deal, Thomas countered, his usual deference replaced by sheer exhaustion. They'll call for your head before they bend the knee to an outsider, especially her. David ran a hand over his face, a raw groan escaping his lips. He collapsed into a leather armchair opposite Thomas, the fight draining out of him. How did this happen, Tom? How did she survive? Thomas hesitated, choosing his words carefully. She wasn't entirely human, David. We knew she had some dormant shifter lineage, but it was too weak to trace. Whatever happened out there in the Badlands, it triggered something. It forged her into a weapon. I broke her, David whispered, the truth finally breaking through his fortified pride. He stared at his hands, remembering the way she had looked at him in the Grand Hall 7 years ago, defiant, proud, refusing to beg even as he ripped her heart out and tossed her away. I did this. You made a choice for the pack, Thomas reminded him, though the conviction in his voice rang hollow. Elena was supposed to secure our borders. Elena is a parasite. David sneered, a sharp surge of disgust welling up. She's spent the last 7 years planning galas while our soldiers die in the dirt. And I allowed it. He stood up abruptly, unable to sit still. The air in the room felt heavy, tainted with his own failures. I need to talk to her. Alone. Thomas sat up straight. David, are you insane? She hates you. If you corner her without an escort, I am the Alpha King of the Blood Moon. David interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. I will not negotiate the fate of my people through intermediaries. I need to look her in the eye and find out if there is even a sliver of the woman I remember left. Before Thomas could argue further, David strode out of the suite. The corridors of the obsidian citadel were eerily quiet during the night cycle. He didn't know exactly where her private quarters were, but his wolf did. The faint, intoxicating scent of dark vanilla lingered in the air, a breadcrumb trail pulling him deeper into the fortress. He moved silently, slipping past automated patrols and heavily armed lichen guards with a stealth honed from years of frontline combat. The scent grew stronger, leading him up a spiral staircase of wrought iron that ended at a heavy, reinforced steel door. 2 massive lichen sentries stood guard. Before they could react to his presence, David dropped his alpha aura, hitting them with a concentrated wave of dominance. It wouldn't hold them for long, but it caused them to stagger backward, clutching their heads as he bypassed them and pushed open the heavy door. He stepped into a sprawling penthouse suite. It was dark, illuminated only by the harsh moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. You always were remarkably arrogant. A voice sliced through the gloom. David froze. Lisa stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the silver light. She had shed the formal suit and coat, wearing only a simple dark silk robe. Her hair cascaded down her back in loose waves. For a fractured second, the terrifying queen vanished, and he saw the girl he had loved. I came to talk, David said, his voice rough. Lisa turned slowly. In the moonlight, her hazel eyes glowed with an unsettling, lupine intensity. She didn't look surprised to see him. She looked profoundly bored. You came to beg, she corrected, walking toward a small bar cart. She poured a measure of clear liquid into a glass. You bypassed my guards to corner me in my private chambers. In any other territory, that would be an act of war, David. We are already at war, David replied, stepping further into the room. I just didn't realize who the enemy was. Lisa paused, the glass halfway to her lips. She let out a short, hollow laugh that sent a shiver down his spine. I am not your enemy, Alpha. I am your consequence. The air in the penthouse crackled with a volatile energy. David felt like he was standing on a landmine, every breath a calculation, every movement a risk. Lisa took a slow sip from her glass, her gaze tracking him with the unblinking focus of a predator deciding whether to play with its food or end it quickly. Consequence, David echoed, the word feeling heavy on his tongue. You think destroying my pack is a fitting punishment for what I did to you? Destroying your pack? Lisa arched an eyebrow, feigning innocence. I'm not destroying anything, David. I'm simply watching it crumble from a comfortable distance. You did the heavy lifting. I made a mistake, David blurted out. It was the first time he had ever spoken the words aloud. The admission tore at his throat, exposing a vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself in 7 years. I chose duty over my mate. I thought you were too fragile. Lisa set her glass down with a sharp clink. The board facade cracked, replaced by a sudden, chilling fury. Fragile. You threw me into the dead of winter, without a cloak, without a pack, into territory crawling with rogues who would have sold me for scraps. You didn't think I was fragile, David. You hoped I was. She moved toward him, closing the distance, until she was mere inches away. The scent of her overwhelmed him, mixing with the sharp tang of ozone radiating from her anger. You wanted me dead, she hissed, her voice vibrating with an unnatural frequency. Because a dead mate is a tragedy. A living, rejected mate is a political liability. That's not true, David snapped, grabbing her arms before he could think better of it. The moment his skin touched hers, a jolt of electricity sparked between them. A desperate flare of a broken bond trying to reignite. Lisa didn't pull away. She stared down at his hands gripping her silk robe, her expression hardening into a mask of pure ice. Take your hands off me, King David, before I have my guards sever them from your wrists. David swallowed hard, the threat very real. He slowly loosened his grip, his hands dropping to his sides, though his palms burned where he had touched her. I sent trackers for you, he whispered, a desperate plea for her to understand. A year later, when the alliance with Elena failed, when the pack started suffering, I tried to find you. A year too late, Lisa replied, turning her back to him. She walked back toward the window, wrapping her arms around herself. It was the first human, vulnerable gesture he had seen her make. The girl you sent trackers for died in the Badlands, screaming her throat raw as the rejection tore through her nervous system. She died when she realized the man who was supposed to protect her was the one holding the knife. Then who are you? David asked, his voice cracking. I am the Aurelian Queen, she said, looking out at the dark ocean. I am the monster you created. Silence descended upon the room, heavy and absolute. David realized, with a sickening drop in his stomach, that apologies and explanations meant nothing here. He was trying to negotiate with a ghost while staring into the eyes of a conqueror. I won't accept vassal state status, David said finally, his tone shifting back to the alpha. He had to compartmentalize. If he let his guilt rule him, he would doom his people. I will negotiate an alliance, a true partnership, but I will not sign my pack into servitude. Lisa slowly turned back to face him. The vulnerability was gone, replaced once more by the calculating monarch. You don't have the leverage for a partnership, she stated flatly. But I am willing to offer a compromise. A trial period. David frowned, wary. What kind of trial? You keep your title. You keep your autonomy, Lisa said, walking back to her desk and picking up a sleek metal pen. She tapped it rhythmically against her palm. In exchange, you grant the Aurelian Empire full occupation of your northern borders. My Lycans will handle the rogue incursions. We will take control of the silver mines to ensure they reach optimal yield. You will essentially become a protected territory. Military occupation, David muttered, the reality of the offer sinking in. You're taking control from the inside out. I am saving your people while ensuring my investment is protected. She countered smoothly. And there is one final condition. David braced himself. Name it. Lisa stopped tapping the pen. She looked at him, a dark, dangerous promise swirling in her hazel eyes. You will kneel, David, she commanded, her voice ringing with the absolute authority of an alpha asserting dominance. Not in a private room, not behind closed doors. Tomorrow, in front of your delegation and my court, you will kneel and pledge fealty to the Aurelian Queen. The demand hung in the air, a devastating blow aimed directly at his pride, his lineage, and his soul. If you want my army, Lisa whispered, a cruel smile touching her lips, you will beg for it properly. Morning broke over the obsidian citadel, not with sunlight, but with a bruising, slate-gray sky that seemed to mirror the heavy dread settling in David's chest. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in his quarters, fastening the cuffs of his darkest ceremonial suit. He wore no armor, no medals of conquest, and no crown. Today, he was not a king preparing for battle. He was a man preparing for his own execution. There has to be another way. Thomas paced the length of the room, his voice tight with panic. The beta had barely slept. David, if you do this, you erase 300 years of Blood Moon sovereignty. The elders will revolt. They'll call for a trial of blood. Let them, David said softly, his voice devoid of its usual commanding resonance. He adjusted his collar, staring at his own reflection. His eyes, usually a vibrant, piercing blue, looked hollow. If they want to fight the Aurelian Empire with empty stomachs and rusted swords, they can try. But I will not let the pups starve because I was too proud to bend. He turned away from the mirror. It's time. The walk to the grand throne room felt like a march to the gallows. As David Thomas and Elder Vance entered the cavernous space, the sheer scale of Lisa's power was laid bare. The hall was packed. Hundreds of Aurelian elites, lichens towering over 7 feet tall, shadow shifters with eyes like polished coal, and human mercenaries clad in cutting-edge tactical gear, lined the obsidian floors. They did not speak. The silence in the room was absolute. A disciplined, terrifying quiet that pressed against David's eardrums. At the far end of the hall, elevated on a dais of pure black marble, sat the Aurelian queen. Lisa was draped in garments of midnight blue and silver, a crown of jagged obsidian resting upon her dark hair. She looked ethereal, untouchable, and devastatingly cold. Beside her stood Marcus, the hulking lichen commander, his hand resting on the pommel of a massive broadsword. Every eye in the room tracked David as he walked down the central aisle. He felt the phantom brush of his pack's ancestors, whispering their shame, their outrage. But louder than their ghostly voices was the memory of the weeping woods, the reports of his men dying, the desperate cries of his people. He reached the base of the dais. Thomas and Elder Vance stopped 10 paces behind him, both trembling, their heads bowed under the suffocating weight of Lisa's alpha aura, which permeated the room like a physical atmosphere. Lisa leaned forward slightly, resting her chin on her hand. She did not prompt him. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to claim his surrender entirely on his own. David looked up at her. He searched those hazel eyes for a flicker of the girl he had once held, the mate he had discarded. There was nothing but the vast, terrifying void of an emperor securing her prize. His jaw clenched. His wolf howled in agony, thrashing against the constraints of his mind, demanding he fight, demanding he bare his fangs and die like an alpha. I am doing this for them, David thought, forcing the beast down into the dark. Slowly, agonizingly, David dropped his right knee to the cold obsidian floor. The sound echoed through the silent hall like a thunderclap. Thomas let out a muffled, broken gasp. Elder Vance looked away, tears of supreme humiliation streaming down his weathered face. David placed his right hand over his heart, bowing his head until he was looking at the polished toe of Lisa's boot. I, David of the Blood Moon. His voice was rough, cracking under the immense strain of a broken pride. Yield my crown, my territory, and my life to the Aurelian Empire. I pledge my loyalty to the Queen. My pack is your pack. My borders are your borders. Command me, and I shall obey. The words tasted like poison, burning his throat, shattering his identity into a million irreparable pieces. A long, excruciating moment passed. Then, the soft rustle of fabric. Lisa stood from her throne. She walked down the steps of the dais, her movements fluid, predatory, She stopped directly in front of him. "Look at me," she commanded softly. David raised his head. Lisa looked down at him, her expression unreadable. She reached out, her cool fingers lightly tracing the line of his jaw. The touch sent a violent, agonizing jolt through his nervous system, the ghost of their bond screaming in recognition. "A king who kneels to save his people," Lisa murmured, her voice carrying only to his ears. "Perhaps there is a leader inside you after all, David. Stand. You are now the warden of the North. Do not make me regret my mercy." The takeover was swift, brutal, and breathtakingly efficient. Within 48 hours of David kneeling at the Obsidian Citadel, the sky above the Blood Moon territory darkened with Aurelian transport ships. Heavily armored Lycan battalions dropped into the weeping woods, their silver-laced weaponry gleaming in the pale winter sun. They moved with a synchronized, lethal precision that made David's exhausted, demoralized soldiers look like children playing with sticks. Standing on the balcony of the pack house, David watched as Aurelian engineers brought massive, humming machinery into the dormant silver mines, restarting operations that had been dead for months. "They're treating our home like a military outpost," Elena spat, storming onto the balcony. David didn't turn to look at her. Elena was dressed in her usual lavish silks, a stark contrast to the grim reality of their situation. For 7 years, he had tolerated her vanity, convincing himself that her pure-blood lineage was necessary for the pack's image. "It is a military outpost, Elena," David said, his voice flat. "It belongs to the Aurelian Empire now." "You coward," she hissed, grabbing his arm and forcing him to look at her. Her beautiful face was twisted in an ugly sneer. "You sold us out to a rogue, to that human-blooded trash you tossed in the snow. The elders are furious. We can rally the neighboring packs. We can—" "Enough!" David roared, his alpha voice vibrating through the stone balcony, forcing Elena to her knees with its sheer concussive force. He stepped over her, his eyes blazing with a cold, dead light. "There is no we, Elena. You have drained this pack's coffers on gowns and galas, while my men bled out in the dirt. Your title as Luna was a political fiction, and that fiction ends today. Pack your things. You are being relocated to the southern civilian sectors." Elena gasped, clutching her chest as the pressure of his command crushed her defiance. "You can't do this to me. I am the warden of this territory," David said quietly, the title tasting bitter but necessary. "And I have finally realized who the real parasites are." 3 days later, the Queen arrived. Lisa did not travel with the massive pageantry of her court. She arrived in a sleek, heavily armored transport, flanked only by Marcus and a dozen elite guards. David stood at the base of the pack house steps, his head bowed in a gesture of submission that was quickly becoming second nature, though it never stopped hurting. As Lisa stepped onto the snow-dusted grounds, she paused. She looked up at the towering stone facade of the Blood Moon pack house. David watched her carefully. He knew exactly where they were standing. It was the exact spot where, 7 years ago, he had declared her an anomaly and banished her into the freezing night. "The architecture hasn't changed," Lisa remarked, her breath pluming in the frigid air. She wore a heavy, fur-lined coat over her tactical suit. "But the rot is palpable. We are clearing the decay, Your Grace," David said, stepping forward to fall into step slightly behind her left shoulder, the position of a subordinate. Lisa turned her head, catching his eye. For a fleeting second, he saw a flash of profound sorrow in her gaze, a momentary crack in the ice before it froze over again. "Walk with me, Warden," she commanded. She led him away from the guards, walking toward the tree line where the dense, dark woods began. The silence between them was thick, laden with 7 years of unspoken trauma. The rogues have been pushed back past the northern ridge, Lisa said, looking out at the trees. Your mines are yielding again. Your people will have food and heating oil before the first blizzard hits. I owe you my life and the lives of my pack, David said, the words heavy and awkward on his tongue. You owe me a debt of service, Lisa corrected sharply. She stopped walking and turned to face him. The winter wind whipped her dark hair around her face. Do not mistake my intervention for forgiveness, David. I did not come back to save you. I came back because this territory is strategically valuable, and because it amused me to see the great Alpha King forced to beg. David flinched, the words striking him like physical blows. He deserved them. He knew he deserved every ounce of her cruelty. I know, he whispered, staring down at the snow. I broke us. I shattered the bond for a crown that was already rusting. If I could go back, you can't, Lisa interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce, echoing with the authority of the ancient blood in her veins. The past is ash, David. You burned it. I am not your mate. I am your sovereign. You will spend the rest of your life answering to the woman you deemed too weak to stand beside you. That is your punishment, and that is your salvation. 6 months later, the Blood Moon territory was unrecognizable. The sprawling pack town, once a grim settlement of boarded-up windows and starving wolves, was thriving. Aurelian infrastructure had modernized the grid. The silver mines were producing record yields, and the borders were impenetrable. David stood in the war room, but the tactical maps were no longer covered in red pins. The rogue threat had been entirely eradicated. Marcus, who had been left behind as the regional commander of the Aurelian garrison, rolled up a map of the eastern ridge. Perimeter is secure, Warden, the massive lichen grunted. No incursions in over a month. The locals are adapting well to the new laws. Thank you, Marcus, David said, exhaustion lining his face. Though it was a different kind of exhaustion now. It was the weariness of hard work, not the paralyzing dread of impending doom. David walked out of the war room and headed toward the packhouse's grand hall. Today, the Aurelian Queen was making her biannual inspection. When he entered the hall, Lisa was already there, examining a tapestry that depicted the first alpha of the Blood Moon. She looked as imperious and untouchable as ever, though the sharp, aggressive edge to her posture had softened marginally, replaced by the calm certainty of unquestioned power. The reports are satisfactory, Lisa said without turning around as David approached. Marcus speaks highly of your cooperation. You have quelled the elder uprisings without shedding Aurelian blood. They understand the reality of our situation now, Your Grace, David replied, keeping his distance. Lisa turned to face him. The harsh winter light caught the silver scar on her wrist. David's eyes flicked to it involuntarily, a dull ache throbbing in his chest. His own wrist bore a matching, jagged scar, the physical manifestation of a severed soul. You look tired, David, she noted, her tone conversational, devoid of the biting venom it had carried months ago. I am rebuilding, he said simply. Lisa walked toward him, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble. She stopped a few feet away, studying his face with an unreadable expression. The arrogant, icy king was truly dead. In his place stood a man humbled, broken, and remade by the consequences of his own hubris. Do you hate me? David asked suddenly, the question slipping out before he could stop it. After everything, now that you have won, now that I am yours to command, do you still hate me? Lisa looked at him for a long, silent moment. The oppressive alpha aura receded, leaving only the quiet space between two people who had profoundly destroyed each other. Hate requires passion, David, Lisa said softly, the truth in her voice far more devastating than anger. I spent all my passion surviving the Badlands. I don't hate you anymore. I pity the boy who was so afraid of looking weak that he threw away his fate. David swallowed hard, his eyes burning. Is there any world, any timeline, where we could have been what the goddess intended? Lisa looked away, staring out the massive windows at the sprawling, prosperous territory she now ruled. Perhaps, she whispered, the sound almost lost to the drafty hall. If you had been brave enough to hold my hand in the dark. But you let go. She turned back to him, her posture straightening, the queen returning to the forefront. You are a good warden, David. Keep my people safe, ensure the tithes are paid, and the Aurelian Empire will protect you until your last breath. That is all we will ever be. She walked past him, her dark vanilla scent lingering in the air like a phantom limb, a constant, haunting reminder of everything he had lost. David did not turn to watch her leave. He stood alone in the grand hall of his ancestors, a king without a crown, a mate without a soul. He looked down at his scarred wrist, closed his eyes, and finally accepted the weight of his reality. He had saved his pack. But the price was living in the cold shadow of the queen he had created, warming his hands on the fading embers of a fire he had foolishly put out. The tragic beauty of David and Lisa's story lies in the unbreakable law of consequence. It is a tale that strips away the fantasy of easy forgiveness, proving that while redemption can save a kingdom, it cannot always heal a shattered heart. David learned the true cost of leadership, trading his arrogance for a lifetime of solitary duty beneath the shadow of the woman he once discarded. Lisa rose from the ashes, not to rekindle a romance, but to forge an empire, transforming her greatest trauma into an unyielding crown. If this story of power, betrayal, and haunting consequences resonated with you, please leave a like. Share your thoughts in the comments on how you think David will handle his lifelong penance. And subscribe for more deep, dramatic tales of alphas, empires, and fate.